Hey there, this is Seth Juarez from Channel 9 coming to you from the beautiful Channel 9 live stage here at Build 2017. We're at the Washington State Convention Center learning about all the cool new things that are happening, and I thought I'd have you on, Taylor, to talk about Windows Server vNext. Why don't you introduce yourself first and tell us what you do?
So I'm Taylor Brown. A lot of you probably know me. I've worked on Windows Server for a long time. But recently I've been working a lot on containers, working with our developers. And basically, it's my job now to get you to love working on Windows Server, writing code for it, building apps on it, running those on Windows Server.
Awesome. So I set up a server a long time ago when I used to get like a box of CDs, and then stuff happened, and then I made IIS work.
Yeah.
Tell me, what's the compelling argument today for working on Windows Server vNext? What are some cool things that are on there? What are some things that you can show me?
Yeah, I mean, so we're working a lot on containers right now. Containers has been just wildly successful, right?
Absolutely.
And it's because it makes it so easy for people to move their code around.
Sure.
So we've got customers who are taking their old apps from like 2003, moving them into containers, giving them new life,
right.
And then they can start iterating on them and building them new. And so this week we also announced a bunch of cool stuff.
Okay.
One, we're joining the Insider program.
So, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So if I want to look at the new stuff, I could be on the Server Fast Ring, for example.
And we're going to start publishing ISOs of Windows Server starting this summer, once a week.
Holy cow. And am I going to have to reinstall it every time, or is there like a partial upgrade?
Yeah, so it's going to be a new ISO, and we're doing some automation work with Vagrant, and we're going to be putting it into Azure and places like that, so it'll be really easy for you to grab a new copy of it. And really, this is for a lot of our developer audience to start with, giving us feedback.
Yeah.
So helping us understand, hey, did we get that right? Is that feature the right way? Did we fix that API the way that you expected? That being able to turn that crank fast is going to be awesome.
Awesome. So let's start with containerization. How do I do that in Windows Server vNext?
So just like you can do it today. So Server 2016, we got containers, Docker run. What we showed today.
Okay, let's see it.
I can now run Linux containers on Windows Server. So I can do Docker run -- isolation equals Hyper-V. And I can run BusyBox, for example. Oops, if I spell isolation right.
Oh, we forgot the I.
Isolation. Oop. I can run BusyBox, which is a real Linux container image pulled straight from the Docker Hub.
How is this happening? Are you running like a Linux VM or what? Tell me what's going on.
So this is a prototype, so it takes a little longer to start up, but we are actually running a little Linux VM in the background that we manage transparently. It's the same Hyper-V isolation we had for Windows Server.
I see.
Now we're bringing that to Linux as well. And so here we are. We are in a bash prompt or a shell prompt running Linux. If my keyboard would work. So I can try.
No, I mean, so in essence, in Windows Server, you are running. Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I just popped out of it. We'll pop back in.
So, and effectively, what you're doing is there's a VM running, and you're just popping Linux containers up.
Yeah.
Is this VM always running, or is it the first time you call one, it just spins it up?
We spin it up completely transparently in the background.
Nice.
Oh, there we go. See, early prototypes.
Nice.
But yeah, it's running a real Linux container natively on Windows Server.
Oh my goodness. And this is something that, so for example, let's just say I have a hybrid application that's doing like .NET Core or that's doing some other things. I can have multiple containers run up, one in Windows container and another in a Linux container on the same box.
Yeah. So if you want to run the Linux distro of Redis using the Red Hat kernel, we can do that for you, running right on Windows Server through this Hyper-V isolation.
How are these? Is there like an ACS management tool for how do you manage all these containers on top of Windows Server?
So we've got a couple different options. We announced this week the general availability of Service Fabric. So Service Fabric can orchestrate containers for you.
Holy cow.
You can use Kubernetes to orchestrate containers through Azure Container Service or standalone.
On Windows Server?
Yeah.
Okay.
And next month, Docker's going to be GA with Docker Data Center, which allows you to do both Windows and Linux clusters or mixed clusters of both.
So let's just say you have to be on-prem and you want to do containerization.
Yeah.
You can literally install Windows Server vNext, have something similar to ACS or a Service Fabric running production style, not that little fake one that we have on our machine when we're doing dev, right?
Yeah, it is the real production Service Fabric. You can stand that up on-prem and run it right on your own data center. And then if you want to move stuff to Azure later on, boom, just kick that container image up. It's the same experience.
So if you have hardware already, there's a real easy way to go in between steps all the way to the cloud.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me show you something else that was
Let's
kind
do
of
it.
cool. So Azure Functions, pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I love about Azure Functions is that it allows me to do these units of computation that I know. Like I might be like, hey, I need to find a quick way to do blah. Azure Functions is the best way to do it. One of the things I've always had a hard time with is that what if some of the stuff is local to my particular environment?
Yeah.
How do I do that?
So this is a box we're connected into. It happens to be running in Azure, but it doesn't need to be.
Yeah.
I'm running Azure Functions in preview locally on this box. It's the exact same thing. So I can say hello, build, create, same UI. All right.
Holy
Let's
cow.
create a new C# trigger. We'll just use the default. Sure. Create. So now this is creating. And what it's actually doing is it's provisioning a container. It happens to be doing one on this machine, but I could actually have a fleet of machines set up that will run this against, even Windows 10 machines. So I could actually harness that laptop and start running some functions on there, slinging those around.
Holy cow. I'm sitting here open mouthed, people. This is, I mean, what you're saying is that the same beautiful UI that we had inside of Azure, now for Azure Functions, now we can just run directly on Windows
Yep.
Server v9. Is that something that I have to install? Is it like a service that I enable?
It's just an MSI. And then you don't even have to be running Server vNext for it. In preview, Server 2016, go get it now, give it a try, let us know what you think.
So for example, someone might be thinking, boy, I wish I could use Azure Functions locally. This is something you can set up right now on your server. And where does it works on what versions does it work?
Server 2016 or Windows 10 with the Creators Update.
And is it literally just, so I can run it on this box right here?
Mm-hmm. Pretty slick.
I'm just saying, people, that's pretty amazing. And
So now you got Service Fabric for your container orchestration. We can bring you functions on-prem. We got Azure Stack coming. The world of hybrid is pretty real.
And so I found a lot of people concerned about moving all the way. For example, there might be stuff that you have to do in your own boxes, and that's perfectly okay now with Windows Server vNext.
Absolutely. Well, and actually even Server 2016. So what vNext is going to bring us is just a whole new evolution of it. Now we get Linux containers on-prem.
Okay.
We're bringing WSL or Bash to Windows Server.
Holy
So
cow.
all those scripts that you might have had on your Windows 10 box that were debugging stuff or launching stuff, great, bring those over to server. We gotcha.
So one of the things that I'm looking at is it looks like there's a lot of coolness already in 2016. What can I expect in vNext for server that's just going to blow my mind as a dev?
So biggest thing, Linux containers and WSL. That seems to be the thing that people are just like super, super amped about. I think the biggest thing is how fast we're getting on this cadence.
Sure.
Right? Like we're going to start delivering you developer innovation at a really fast pace so that you can realize the best stuff. We're also bringing a bunch of orchestration capabilities in. So that's going to make all those orchestrators, whether it's Service Fabric or Kubernetes or Swarm, they're going to run better on Windows Server now. We're bringing better volume mapping support for containers. That's going to be pretty awesome. And we're refactoring Nano Server for containers quite a bit.
I see.
So we're working with the .NET team to make .NET Standard 2.0 and Nano Server like the best pairing possible.
So for those that don't know what Nano Server is, why don't you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so Nano Server is our cloud-born OS. So it's the minimal kind of install of Windows, really designed for cloud applications. And in Server 2016, it was already much smaller than Server Core and really targeted at .NET 1.6. We're going to reduce the size of it by over half for Server vNext.
Wow.
We're removing all sorts of services that people weren't really using and focusing it on .NET Standard 2.0 to make that thing just awesome for .NET Standard 2.0 development.
So Nano Server is it like a tiny server with just a headless with no UI?
Headless with no UI, which is exactly what a container is, right? So it's perfect pairing for a container.
So whenever you spin up like a container, it's going to spin up a Nano Server container?
You can do Nano or Server Core.
I see.
So for all those traditional apps that we have, all those things that we wrote years ago
I get it.
that are kind of hard to manage, kind of hard to refactor, we move those over to Server Core, and then we can start spinning up Nano containers and breaking off pieces in .NET Standard 2.0 and making our new code using the new language.
Let's talk about security and containerization. Yeah. Generally, that's generally there's some concern that I've heard about, I may be mistaken. How do we manage security in containers? Tell us what Hyper-V does to help with that.
Yeah, so we've got this Hyper-V isolation technology that we talked about a little bit with the Linux container. What that does is it allows us to wrap the entire container in a VM.
Right.
And so this is how we're going to run all of our services in Azure now. So anything that's hostile multi-tenant, like, hey, I'm taking a PowerShell script from you and from your friend and from anyone else, and we're running those on your behalf. We're running those inside of containers.
Wow.
Right? Just like we're doing here with Azure Functions, right? So I've got Docker up, and I can actually do a Docker PS, and I can see these are the actual containers that are running these functions, right? So here's
and
the
I
one.
wanted to talk to you about this because that's interesting. Like, this was the you wrote the Azure function here,
Yeah.
and it created 2 containers for that.
Right, because I've got one for this function, test function right here, that's just been running all week. And then this one, hello build, that I just created a minute ago. And so we can actually see, if I list these out again, the hello build one is run 2 times, test functions run 831. Because it's just been running all day.
Now, here's the crazy thing, because one of the problems that I've always had as a dev is understanding the isolation level of functionality for a container. An Azure function as a discrete unit of computation is the perfect isolation level for a container. Like, as I'm thinking about it.
They go hand in hand really well, right? So what it really comes down to from an Azure function standpoint is you as the dev, give me code. We as the Azure and the Windows Server team, we'll run that stuff for you all day long. And we'll use containers to do that because it's the right way to isolate it. But if you've got something that you want to provide the isolation for, you're going to package it up, make a container image out of it, we'll run that for you too.
Awesome. Is there a way with Azure Functions to group the Azure function into a specific container, or will it always just put it in a container?
So with the on-prem version that we're talking about now, it's always going to run in a container.
Right.
Because that's the easy way for us to isolate it away. Now, when we're running it in full Azure, we're actually using some additional technology we have as they converge on containers. So they're moving all of that over to containers as well while we're moving forward.
All I know is that, like, the first time I used Azure Functions in a Logic app, I was blown away with the idea of serverless, right? Because I'm sitting there thinking as a programmer, I need to make this full API, and I need to expose this whole thing, and since it's all stateless anyways in my API, it feels like every one of those calls in my API should be its own function. Azure Functions made perfect sense, and now that we're able to segregate them even into containers, which are protected and isolated, that's pretty cool too.
And I think what we're going to start to see is people are going to evolve the way that they develop code. So it's going to be, I'm going to use a container for my middle tier. And I'm going to use some Azure Functions off to the side for doing various API calls and various functionality. And maybe the actual web front end is going to use a PaaS layer, or maybe the database is going to be in Azure DB. And they're going to bring all of that together and use the best parts of the platforms in order to bring their apps to life, right?
Awesome. So I'm loving what I'm seeing. Where can I go to get started with this technology?
So you can certainly go to aka.ms/containers.
Okay.
That's got our container landing page. A ton of useful information on that. Go check out my Channel 9 video from this morning.
Absolutely.
This session. At the end of that, we've got our user voice. We've got our insider program links. We got all of it. Or certainly go ahead and send me or my team an email. We love talking to customers. We love talking to developers. You are our people.
I'm loving, seriously, I'm loving what I'm seeing with specifically with Azure Functions running on-prem. I wish I would have had this like 10 years ago. There's so many things that I would not have done. Many mistakes I would not have made in my youth as a programmer if it weren't for this. Thanks so much for spending some time with us, bud. Is there anything else you want to show us?
Boy, the other couple things that we to announce that I'll just drop in.
Please do.
We did a whole bunch of work for orchestration. We're doing a bunch of work to bring SMB volumes to containers.
Oh, cool.
So now I can use a file server and map that transparently into the container.
Oh, that's really nice.
That's pretty neat stuff.
Yeah.
And a bunch of great networking additions. So better networking, easier to use, better management around it. So a lot of little things that map into a really big set of value.
And if you are the kind of a shop that needs to have things on-prem, looks like Windows Server vNext is the best way to go into the cloud space without having to be all the way in the cloud. And now with other things like in Logic Apps with connectors and such, you'll be able to even hook from the cloud to your own stuff. It's a really great time to be using Windows Server.
It is, absolutely. We're really excited about it.
Awesome. Thanks so much for spending time with us. Again, here we're Taylor Brown learning all about Windows Server vNext. Learn some really awesome stuff about Azure Functions, containers, not just Windows containers, but also Linux containers. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Take care.